folks. This is the first of my series of videos for the webinar and webcast section. I'm going to talk a little bit about specific software that you might consider using to do your class assignments. First, I just want to kind of just talk about video conference software in general, and then we're going to get into another lecture specific to webcasts and one specific to webinar software. So anyway, let's talk about video conferences. You know, this concept's been around for a while. They were actually imagining video conferences back as early as the 1870s, but we know that we've only really been using it, I don't know, last 15 years or so seriously, and it's really only taken off in a big way for the past half decade. If you think about where video conferencing tools were just like a decade ago, it's changed so much. It was kind of a niche, thing before. It was really awkward doing conferences back then because you just didn't have the bandwidth. It wasn't easy to transmit those messages in a quality way. So it didn't make it very practical. Now we have so much more bandwidth. We have the technology that can make it easy to transmit messages around the world, and it's a much more feasible, low-cost option that you can think about. And we're very fortunate that we came about with that kind of technological advance before the pandemic kicked in, because that would have been really unfortunate and really hurt business in a more severe way. We know that even before COVID hit us, we were seeing so much change happening in the space of video conferencing tools. A lot of the people that were the top players before are gone. A lot of them have evolved and changed, like Skype has been acquired. Google keeps changing what its approach is, going from like a Hangouts approach to more trying to be more competitive and think about how do people actually use these tools in the pandemic. So you're seeing major players, they're still in this space, but everything keeps changing. I think one of the key things, this is not just about video conferencing, but about technology in general. You keep seeing so many acquisitions happening. There's so many things shifting hands because the major players like the Microsofts, the Google, Apple, they all want to be your one-stop technology thing. And so this is just another spoke in their hub. They're trying to find so many different ways to be everything to you that you start to form a really strong technological hub that you count on. And it works really well. A lot of people buy Apple products because of that, of the integration between things. We know that a lot of people like Google because everything seems seamless, and that makes a lot of sense if you had an Android phone. And that's we're going to see more and more of that continuing. And video conferencing is like a really powerful connector, a really important part of how people are going to make choices about which tool to use, because it's such a big part of business today, and it's going to continue even as we come out of the pandemic. I think that a lot of people that are older, such as myself, who remember video conferencing in the earlier days, it was just such a painful, awkward experience that it's really easy to dismiss it. It's also not just because we had pain with the technology. It's just I think a lot of people grew up in a world where they're so used to shaking hands, looking people in the eye, and that's a very comfortable way to do business. I think younger generations feel a little bit less comfortable with that because they've spent so much of their lives staring at screens that just the whole idea of holding eye contact, being in close proximity to someone and making that personal connection, that can be a little awkward in a business situation, where I see students who are very smart, very capable of getting the idea of networking, having a hard time doing it. But I'm getting off topic. The point is there's a lot of challenges around video conferencing. Even though we're successfully using it for business, I think there's a lot of sociological issues around it and things that you might see generational differences between people and the attitudes they have about video conferencing. And I think that's really important as you're thinking about event marketing. Just to understand different people have very different relationships with this and might be more open or more resistant to your event marketing approaches. Okay, now let's get into the actual software part. We know with all the technology battles, it is not just video conferencing, but it usually ends up being there's some dominant player that picks up steam. Everybody likes that person. It's like, I want to be part of that one. And it's clear that Zoom is winning. Zoom has become the default player in the United States and across the world. But if you look at that percentage, it's not even half the market yet. So that's still and it's a monopoly. It's pretty big, but it's not. The battle's not over. It is not completely dominant in the way that like Google is for search engines through most of the world. And even there, it's still the battle's still not over because you see serious Chinese players growing very quickly. But I mean, there's no doubt about it. You earn $4 billion in revenue each year. You're a pretty serious company. I just want to make sure and show you this really great infographic though, and just understand that Zoom's not the only game in town. This one here, if you're looking at other countries and who the dominant player is, yeah, you see Zoom in a lot of the major countries, but you're also seeing Teams and you're also seeing Google popping up here as serious possibilities in some major markets. And if you're going to be doing business with other parts of the world, it's really important for you to keep in mind that, there are different preferences across different markets. I think it's also smart to, remember there's regional biases. So like, particularly living here in Seattle, it makes sense to know your way around Microsoft Teams because you might be doing a virtual interview for a job at Microsoft. It would certainly help to know your software. That also goes for client work. If you are trying to do a webinar and win Microsoft over to do, you use their tools, be respectful. Um, Speaking of Microsoft, their Teams is not growing the same way that like Zoom is, but it's still seeing some significant growth. Its global market share has grown from 10 to 15%. It, I think, Microsoft has definitely seen a positive experience of rebranding Live Meeting to Teams. A lot of people don't like Teams, but I think Live Meeting had an even more toxic brand, and people are. It's just a little bit more positive experience compared to where they were before. I think that also Teams just does a much better job of integrating with other Microsoft stuff, particularly with Microsoft Office and Outlook. If you are like most business people and spending much of your time in Outlook, and that's your primary um, email browser, it just kind of makes sense to have a tool that integrates nicely with that. Microsoft also purchased Skype. And so, when I was saying a minute ago, like how fortunes have changed for who are the leading players, like it seemed like Skype was the sure thing, right? Skype was extremely popular because people were already using it for doing international phone calls for free. And it just seemed like a great opportunity. But if you look at its global market share, it has shrank from an enormous 32% to just 7%. I'm not saying that that was necessarily a bad thing that Microsoft bought Skype for the money that it did, because they could have used that technology very much for um, speeding up the growth of Microsoft Teams or other types of innovations that are happening at Microsoft. But it's just kind of funny how things can change so fast. Um, and yeah, anyway, moving on. Some of the other ones, Google Hangouts is definitely been, they gave up on it over at Google, but now Google Meet is really seeing some significant growth. Where Hangout shrunk from 7 to 1%, Google Meet has gone from 7 to a whopping 22%. That's a pretty significant growth pattern. And, it also is popular because it integrates with other tools. I think one of the key things about it, though, is not a lot of big businesses use Gmail as their default email browser. So one of the tricks about doing this is you have to have a Gmail account to work with it, just like so many other Google tools. And that can be an awkward sticking point for, trying to get people to come to your webinar, your webcast. Slack and GoToMeeting, they were serious competitors, but you're really seeing them lose a lot of market share, and their brands are fading. Slack went down from a pretty significant 18% to 4%. GoToMeeting is all the way now down to 1. Um, I think it's also worth mentioning that, when FaceTime was first created by Apple, Steve Jobs, imagined this being a full-featured video conferencing tool. He certainly wasn't just kind of seeing it as more of the personal video conferencing, the one-on-one communication that it largely has become. So Apple's kind of, given up some ground there that it really should have innovated when it had the advantage. So why would you use some of these tools maybe for doing your webinar or your webcast assignments, or just use them in general for this kind of event marketing? Well, it kind of makes sense if your target audience is already familiar with the software. Familiarity is going to make it easier for them to jump right in and be part of your event. If you're using these tools yourself at your business, it's going to really help you to have your familiarity, because then you can feel comfortable with the interface. You can pull reports. You can think about how does this connect with like a shared drive where you could store the white paper you want people to download after watching your webinar. All of that kind of comfort level is going to just make you a better event marketing leader. So that's definitely worth consideration. I put here Boulder ID. They're ideal for both of these tools are ideal for webinars. And the reason why is they are designed for. Oops, I jumped ahead. They are designed for having interactive experiences. So there's features in it that allow for people to have conversations, and you can look at the chat, you can do some polling, you can do some of these things in these free tools. That's really going to be the key things that make like a webinar in particular interactive and really useful. So I think it's definitely worth considering using some of these. Particularly not just for this class, but as you're moving forward, it makes a lot of sense to use tools people know. But on the other hand, you're in this class to learn new software, try new things. So now I'm going to show you 2 other videos where I talk about some webcast software and then some webinar software. And I'm hoping that those things are going to have you try out some new software tools, so you can put things on your resume, you can try something new, and hopefully it'll be a positive experience that will get you to think a little bit more about how to do optimal webcast and web conference and things. As usual, if you've got any questions, just shoot me a note. Happy to talk to you some more about this. Thanks for joining me.